Alright guys, welcome back to F1 Drama. Formula 1 CEO Stefano Domenicali has levelled up his proposal from a few months ago where he said that free practice sessions should give out points and have some rewards in place, to now straight up cancelling all of the practice sessions over a Grand Prix weekend. What would that mean for Formula 1? Is this again another sign we're going down a slippery slope where entertainment is valued more highly than the competition itself? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. Thanks for 19,000 subs as well. Fantastic stuff. Also, just quickly, I thought it was funny, Fernando Alonso, this guy's been going rogue on Twitter lately, but of course the Aussie Grand Prix is coming up and Fernando is obviously clearly getting ready for it. Now, many rule changes lately in Formula 1, and it does feel like they're trying to, Liberty Media as much as they can, push the entertainment value as much as possible, and this seemingly extends to getting rid of practice sessions. So I believe it was at the Moto Grand Prix race just yesterday where Stefano Domenicali was quoted talking about the free practice sessions. Since 2006 in Formula 1, there has been what we have now, the FP1, FP2, FP3, and then qualifying and then the race. Now, on a sprint weekend, of which there are 6 this season for the Grand Prix, there's only 2 practice sessions, one on Friday, then qualifying, one on Saturday before the sprints, and then the race on Sunday. Now, in my opinion, 2 practice sessions might be preferable, to be honest, because those sprint weekends, I don't like the sprint races personally. I don't think they're very good. If there's any interesting things in qualifying, they get shaped out in the sprint regardless. But I will say that having the weekend run on one qualifying session before the teams have to set their car up for quali, at which point it's then under parc ferme conditions and they can't make any changes to their setup apart from small things with the front wing adjustments and stuff before the sprint race on Saturday, because they've only got an hour to set up their car, it does make for a more interesting weekend in general, where teams maybe got their setup wrong on Friday and therefore great cars might be struggling for the weekend. Whereas with 3 hours of practice, most of the teams usually dial in their setups to the maximum potential, and therefore the weekend effectively moves more predictably. Whereas the idea of reducing the practice sessions is that the weekend becomes less predictable, which is maybe better for the fans, maybe though worse for the competition element of the sport. That's a question. So I don't mind 2 practice sessions, and even just having one before a sprint does mean that the weekend, for example, Brazil, or even in Austria, for example, last year, when Red Bull might well have won that race had they have had more setup time, they got it wrong on their one free practice session on Friday before they had to set up their car. They did the same in Brazil later in the year. Even Red Bull last year, and it might be a similar story this year, they tended to take 2-3 hours of practice before they got their car dialed in. If they were given 1 hour or 0 hours, then the challenge is much greater for the engineers rather than getting all the data over 3 hours. But, this is a thing for a reason. We have the 3 hours of practice on the Friday, on the Saturday morning before quali and the race on a normal weekend, but Stefano Domenicali wants it gone. This was his quote that he said at, as we saw via Sport TV at the Portuguese Grand Prix for MotoGP. I am in favour of cancelling the practice sessions that are of great benefit to the engineers, but which the public does not like. So look, fundamentally, Formula 1 is a driver's championship, a constructor's championship, but it's also an engineer's championship in a way. The car is the most important thing of any team, any driver in Formula 1, especially in the modern era. The point of Formula 1 and the reasons in some senses why some of these auto manufacturers invest so much is because, they can understand the most about their cars and about the new concepts they might want to bring. So you've got to give some credit to them as well in terms of they like the practice sessions to set up their car and get some interesting ideas and feedback and reaction, and therefore the engineers would like it to stay. However, the general public might not be so convinced. Now, to be honest, if you're watching this channel and, me, myself making these videos, we're pretty hardcore Formula 1 fans in general. I will watch the practice sessions, sometimes just as background noise, but I will put them on. FP1 is always very interesting to see how the teams are stacking up in the practice sessions over the course of the weekends. And yes, they might not be the most watchable at times, but I still think they're good entertainment. Now, yes, the casual fan might not care so much about practice, doesn't really watch any of them, and just turns up for quali in the race, which is all fair enough. And Stefano Domenicali, I think what he's really saying here is not, not necessarily the fans don't like them, but money talks, right? And the more sessions they can have with more viewers, the more money they can inevitably generate, which is really the reason why they're pushing these sprint races. So quali is Friday, Saturday is a sprint race, Sunday is a Grand Prix race, and therefore every weekend has something of interest to the casual audience, which is understandable, but fundamentally not what I think is best for the sport. Now, a few months ago, he said that he would give rewards for practice. So he said at the time that his opinion would be to give points or something for practice sessions, which is obviously an outrageous idea. So clearly that idea behind the scenes got turned down dramatically. So now he's like, maybe let's just cancel them. Now, what does does cancel them mean? Does it mean cancel one? Does it mean cancel all? Like, are we going to turn up on a Friday and do quali on a Friday straight away with no practice? Maybe. I don't think that would be good, but I mean, it would be interesting to see. The grid would be more jumbled, let's say. I don't think that's good for competition necessarily, but it would be interesting nonetheless, and maybe that's what Domenicali wants, right? He wants the spectacle, which is understandable, but there's a balance here to me between making the spectacle better, but also maintaining the integrity of the sport, and also allowing the sport to do what it does for the wider automotive community. And there was some sarcastic replies here from Gianna De Kessler, who says, at this point, I would also just race on Sunday and go. The grid is established in a random draw to increase the show and reduce costs. So I assume De Kessler has been kind of sarcastic and saying, oh yeah, just turn up on the one day on Sunday, just do a randomized grid and go. Like, that is the ultimate, randomization and therefore entertainment value, but and maybe it would reduce costs, but fundamentally, that's not what the sport is about. So what do you guys think about this? Because I wouldn't mind going to like 2 practice sessions in a way. The third practice session, I feel at times is redundant, and if you could just have 2 hours of practice, that should be enough, I think, for the teams to get things dialed in before the weekends. But if you only have 2 hours of practice, what do you do with that additional time that you unlock? Because Stefano Domenicali certainly doesn't want to waste any time, right? Like, he would prefer there to be stuff going on all the time the entire weekend to maximize the viewership and the sponsorship revenue. So cutting a free practice session with nothing to replace it doesn't make sense for him either, I don't imagine. So he must have some idea what he wants to do, unless his glorious idea is sprint races every weekend, which I would not want to see at all. I don't think they're very good in Formula 1, but at least they are better than giving out points for free practice. So intrigued to your thoughts on that. There's a lot of drama really lately with Formula 1 and its direction, and focusing on the spectacle more so than what the sport has been for the last however long. It's a bit of a question, but we can see the timetable here for the Australian Grand Prix. There's a lot that goes on. Obviously, quali, FP1, FP2, FP3, etc., etc. So, there's a lot that happens over the weekends, and cancelling with no replacement doesn't really make that much sense either. So, what direction is this going down? I know that a lot of the community reaction has been kind of a slippery slope here towards, getting rid of practice. The public doesn't like them, apparently, even though, is there really evidence for that? I'm not so sure. And it comes amid a lot of other criticism around Formula 1 the way it currently is. We know that the cars are more challenging to follow with this year than they were last year. Even Kimi Räikkönen, who raced in NASCAR yesterday, said, look, it's actually much easier to overtake with these cars in NASCAR because they've got less downforce, therefore less dirty air. You can race better, maybe almost like you could back in the day in Formula 1, where, okay, the NASCAR cars aren't exactly nimble, but, he even said it's a bit trickier in a NASCAR car to do a lot of the corners because in F1, there's so much downforce. A lot of the corners are just a straight where you turn, right? And we saw that with W11 in, Puon W11 2020. Hamilton in that Mercedes is Spa, that is a corner, but the W11 made it a straight. And Räikkönen's main point is around overtaking is not kind of possible in F1 without the DRS, which I think is a fair point as well at times. And even Jeremy Clarkson gave his thoughts on the tyre life. If you guys remember back in the day, the tyres were way more durable. And in the last couple of decades, Pirelli have been asked to make the tyres degrade. Now, the theory with the tyres degrading would be that, oh yeah, the teams will have to pit 2, 3, 4 times a race. It'll be fantastic. The tyres are degrading all the time. They'll have to pit all the time. It will create so much strategy chaos. And the idea of that, in a way, was to increase the level of interest in how entertaining the sport was to watch. Because the more pit stops you get in a race, the better the race is generally. I think that's still true today. The issue is, though, what they did instead, the drivers all right, well, let's just preserve our tyres. And nowadays, they go into this whole, lap 5 to 20 of the race is usually just tyre degradation stints. No drivers are doing anything. They're just doing laps to preserve their tyre life. And that's probably not what we want to watch either, right? So there's a debate to say, well, actually, make the tyres degrade less, because they could do that. Tyres in the past degraded less than they do today, and therefore the drivers will push harder, which is probably true. But then you get less pit stops. So, I don't know. It's always a bit of a debate that's happened in Formula 1 over the last few years. The other thing that people aren't happy with Stefano Domenicali about is that they might move the Spanish Grand Prix at the circuit, Catalonia, Barcelona, whatever it's called, to Madrid. Now, if there's a race in Madrid, is that going to be in Madrid? Is it going to be slightly outside of Madrid? Or is that going to be a street circuit in Madrid? Because if that's the case, I'm going to be fuming. Barcelona, I know people don't like it. They say it's a possession. I don't mind it. I think it's a beautiful track, actually. But maybe for the modern Formula 1 cars, it's not the best race you're going to find. But it's at least a traditionally purpose-built circuit. Whereas if there's a Madrid, if the Spanish Grand Prix becomes a Madrid street circuit, we've got all the other street circuits, I'm not going to be happy because, that really does show that money is talking. But just a quick comment coming up to this upcoming weekend. Just thought it was interesting to see how the difference in race pace existed between the cars 2022 and 2023. There's a couple of outliers here, one of which is Ferrari. Their car this year was exactly the same speed as last year's Ferrari, whereas every other car got significantly quicker. The Mercedes over a second, the Red Bull just under a second, but the Aston Martin 3 seconds a lap faster in 23 than last year. That is absurd, and that's just one of those things that you do not expect to be the case. But very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.